For 10 years, the sound of my cello in apartment 4B was simply the sound of home. It was the sound of my soul learning to speak, the deep, resonant, and sometimes melancholy voice of my life's one true passion. It was the sound of my morning practice, a ritual of scales and Bach suites that echoed the rising of the sun. It was the sound of my evenings, of me wrestling with a difficult new piece, the notes a tangible, vibrating presence in the quiet, comfortable space I had worked so hard to create. I had no idea that my new landlord, a man with a soul made of beige carpeting and corporate legalese, considered the sound of my life to be a lease violation. My apartment wasn't just an apartment, it was my sanctuary, a beautiful, pre-war one-bedroom on the top floor of a charming old brownstone in the city. It had good bones, high ceilings, and the kind of afternoon light that made the warm wood of my cello glow like amber. This building was a rare thing in the city. A community. Mr. Henderson, the man who had owned the building for 40 years, was our landlord, but he was also our neighbor. He lived on the first floor, and he loved my music. On warm evenings, he would sometimes leave his door ajar when I practiced. "It's better than the television, Clara," he'd say to me, his eyes twinkling. My neighbors were my friends. The young couple across the hall would sometimes leave notes on my door. "Your practice session last night was beautiful. You're getting so good at that Elgar concerto." We were a small, 6-unit family. We looked out for each other. Then, 6 months ago, Mr. Henderson, now in his late 80s, had announced he was retiring and selling the building. We were all heartbroken and terrified. We knew what would happen. A faceless real estate corporation would buy the building, gut the apartments of all their charm, and double the rent. Our little community would be destroyed. The notice that arrived a month later was a small relief. The building had been sold, not to a massive developer, but to a small, private LLC, the Pendleton Group. The letter said there was a new property manager, a man named Mr. Peterson, from a company called Sterling Property Management. While we were sad to see Mr. Henderson go, we were at least grateful that the building hadn't been sold to a corporate giant. Oh, how naive we were. My first interaction with Mr. Peterson was over the phone. I had called to report a leaky faucet in my bathroom. Mr. Henderson would have been over in an hour with his own toolbox. Mr. Peterson, on the other hand, made me feel like I was a profound inconvenience. A leak, he'd said, his voice a flat, bored monotone. "Did you file a formal maintenance request through the online tenant portal?" "I just noticed it this morning," I explained. "I thought I should call. All non-emergency requests must be submitted through the portal." "Mr. Vance," he'd sighed, as if explaining a complex scientific theory to a very slow child. "It will be logged, and a technician will be assigned to your case within 5 to 7 business days." He was a man who spoke in corporate jargon and clearly hated his job. He was the human embodiment of a beige cubicle wall, and for some reason, from that very first interaction, he seemed to have a special, particular dislike for me. The harassment began a week later. It was subtle at first. A sterile, computer-printed note slipped under my door. "Notice a noise complaint has been received regarding Unit 4B. Please be advised that building quiet hours are from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. Thank you, management." I stared at the note, baffled. I had been practicing that afternoon, as I always did, around 4 o'clock, miles away from quiet hours, and I had never, in 10 years, had a single complaint. I assumed it was a mistake, a notice delivered to the wrong door. I threw it away. The next week, another note appeared. This one was more direct. Second notice. Multiple noise complaints have been received regarding excessive noise musical instrument from Unit 4B during the day. Please be mindful of your neighbors and keep noise to a minimum at all times. Multiple complaints at all times. A cold knot of anxiety began to form in my stomach. Was I bothering my neighbors? Had I become a nuisance without realizing it? I felt a wave of shame. I immediately went downstairs and knocked on the door of the young couple across the hall. "Hey guys," I said. When they opened the door, "I am so sorry. My music? Has it been bothering you? I got a couple of notices from the new property manager." They looked at me, completely bewildered. "Bothering us, Sarah," the teacher said. "No, we love it." We were just saying last night how much we enjoy hearing you practice. It's like a free concert. We haven't complained about anything. I felt a surge of relief, followed by a new wave of confusion. I checked with Mrs. Gable on the third floor. Same story. She adored my playing, she said. It reminded her of her late husband. No one had complained, which meant that Mr. Peterson was lying. But why? Have you ever dealt with someone who insists there's a problem that you know, for a fact, does not exist? They make you question your own reality. They make you wonder if you're the crazy one. He said multiple tenants. And for a second, I had started to believe him. I had started to see myself as a nuisance, a problem. It's a powerful, insidious form of gaslighting. And if you've ever been gaslit by a landlord, a boss, or anyone in a position of power, hit that like button, because you know the quiet, crazy-making rage I was feeling. I decided to be proactive. I was a good tenant. I was a considerate neighbor. I bought a heavy, expensive tort mute for my cello, a small lead device that sits on the bridge and dampens the sound significantly. The cello's beautiful. Resonant voice was reduced to a thin, quiet whisper. It was a sad sound, but it was a quiet one. It didn't matter. The phone call from Mr. Peterson came the following Monday. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice dripping with a false, polite patience. "We are still receiving complaints about the music coming from your apartment." "That's impossible, Mr. Peterson," I said, my own patience now wearing thin. "I am using a professional-grade mute. You can barely hear the instrument inside my own apartment, let alone through the walls." "Well, our other tenants seem to disagree," he said coolly. "This is a residential building, Ms. Vance, not Carnegie Hall. The new owners, the Pendleton Group, are very serious about maintaining a quiet and peaceful environment for all residents. If you are unable to control your noise levels, we may have to explore other options." The threat was there, hanging in the air between us, veiled in polite corporate language. Other options, eviction. The final straw came a week later. It was a formal, certified letter taped to my door. It was a final warning and notice of lease violation. It was a terrifying document, full of dense, threatening legalese. It cited 3 separate, documented instances of excessive noise violations. It stated that I was in breach of my lease agreement, and it warned that any further complaints would result in the immediate initiation of eviction proceedings. I sat on my sofa, the letter trembling in my hands. This was insane. I was being systematically harassed, targeted by this man for reasons I could not comprehend. And he was building a paper trail, a series of official-looking lies, that would eventually give him the legal grounds to throw me out of my own home. I felt helpless. I felt powerless. He was a professional property manager, backed by a real estate company. I was just a musician. Who would they believe? I thought about my grandfather. He had been a quiet, unassuming man, a high school math teacher, but he was the wisest person I had ever known. He had always told me, "Clara, in this world, there will always be bullies, people who try to use their little bit of power to make you feel small. Don't ever let them. You fight back, not with anger, but with intelligence. You find a bigger, smarter person to fight on your side." My grandfather had passed away 5 years ago, but he had left me a small trust, an inheritance that I had never touched, managed by his old friend and lawyer, a man named Mr. Harrison. I hadn't spoken to Mr. Harrison in years. He was a family lawyer, an estate lawyer. I didn't know if he handled tenant disputes, but he was the only lawyer I knew. And he had been my grandfather's closest friend. With a sense of desperation, of having no other options, I looked up the number for his old law firm. I picked up the phone. I was just a girl with a cello, being bullied by her landlord. I had no idea that I was about to make a phone call that would change everything. I had no idea about the secret my grandfather, the quiet high school math teacher, had left behind, a secret that was bigger, more powerful, and more deliciously ironic than anything I could have ever imagined. The official warning notice, taped to my door with an aggressive amount of clear packing tape, changed everything. It was no longer a matter of a petty, power-tripping property manager. It was a formal, documented declaration of war. The language was cold, legalistic, and full of phrases like breach of covenant, and grounds for immediate termination of tenancy. Mr. Peterson was no longer just harassing me. He was building a legal case to make me homeless. My life in apartment 4B, my beloved sanctuary, became a prison of silence. The joy I had once found in my music was replaced by a constant, gnawing anxiety. I became paranoid about every sound I made. I would practice my cello while sitting inside my own closet, the heavy winter coats serving as a pathetic, makeshift soundproofing, my bow barely whispering across the strings, a heavy tort mute choking the life out of every note. The beautiful, resonant voice of my instrument was reduced to a thin, strangled whimper, and still, I was terrified that it was too loud. I started walking around my own apartment on tiptoe. I would wash dishes by filling one side of the sink with soapy water and gently placing each dish in, one by one, terrified that the clatter of a plate might trigger another complaint. My home was no longer a place of peace. It was a place of fear. The harassment escalated in other, pettier ways. I received a formal notice of a $50 fine for improperly sorted recycling, with a blurry photo of a cardboard box in the wrong bin attached as evidence. I received another warning about unauthorized items on my balcony, referring to the small pot of basil I had kept there for 5 years. Mr. Peterson was papering my file, creating a portrait of me as a problem tenant, one violation at a time. I was being bullied, pure and simple. He was trying to make my life so miserable that I would either give up and leave, or I would make a mistake that would give him the legal grounds to force me out. I knew his goal. He wanted my apartment, my rent stabilized. Top floor, beautiful apartment. If he could get me out, his company, the Pendleton Group, could do a cheap renovation and double the rent for the next tenant. I wasn't a person to him. I was an underperforming asset. Have you ever dealt with a bully who uses rules and bureaucracy as their weapon? They gaslight you into thinking you're the one who's unreasonable, while they are the ones systematically trying to destroy you. If you've ever been in that position, where you feel completely powerless against a system that is being weaponized against you, you know the specific, helpless rage I was feeling. The final straw came on a Friday morning. It was another official notice, slipped under my door. This one was a final warning and 3-day notice to cure or quit. It stated that one more noise complaint, however small, would result in the immediate initiation of eviction proceedings. I had 3 days to cure the problem. Of course, being my very existence. I sat on my floor, the notice trembling in my hands, and I finally broke down. I was going to lose my home, after 10 years, because of a man who had invented a problem and was now using a legal loophole to punish me for it. It was in that moment of absolute despair that I remembered my grandfather's voice, a memory so clear it was like he was in the room with me. In this world, Clara, there will always be bullies. Don't ever let them make you feel small. You fight back, not with anger, but with intelligence. You find a bigger, smarter person to fight on your side. My grandfather had passed away 5 years ago, but his presence was still a steadying force in my life. He had been a quiet, unassuming high school math teacher, a man who believed in logic and integrity above all else. He had left me a small trust fund, an inheritance I had never touched, content to let it grow, managed by his old friend and estate lawyer, a man named Marcus Harrison. I hadn't spoken to Mr. Harrison since the initial probate meetings after my grandfather's death. He was an estate lawyer. I didn't know if he handled tenant-landlord disputes, but he was the only lawyer I knew. And he was the smarter person my grandfather would have wanted me to call. With a sense of final, desperate resolve, I found the number for his old, respectable law firm, and I made the call. The law offices of Harrison. Croft and Associates were a world away from the sterile, corporate aesthetic of Sterling Property Management. The waiting room was quiet and dignified, with dark wood paneling, comfortable leather armchairs, and the quiet, calming scent of old books and lemon polish. It felt safe. Mr. Harrison greeted me himself. He was a man in his 70s, with a kind, gentle face, a shock of white hair, and the same warm, intelligent eyes I remembered from his eulogy at my grandfather's funeral. "Clara, my dear girl," he said, his voice full of a genuine warmth as he took both of my hands in his. It has been too long. You look so much like your grandmother. Please, come in. Tell me everything. How can I help? He led me into his office, a beautiful, book-lined room that looked out over the city park. He sat me down, brought me a cup of tea himself, and he just listened. I told him the whole sordid story, the sale of the building, the new property manager, Mr. Peterson, the campaign of harassment, the fake noise complaints, the fines for the recycling, the basil plant, and finally, the 3-day eviction notice. I laid all the documents, all the threatening, bureaucratic notes, out on his polished mahogany desk. He listened patiently, his expression serious and attentive, nodding occasionally. He reviewed every single document I had brought, his sharp eyes missing nothing. When I was finished, my voice was shaking with a mixture of rage and fear. I felt so foolish, so small, bringing this petty little tenant dispute to such an important, dignified man. I know it's not a big case, I said, my voice a little shaky, but I don't know what to do. He's going to kick me out of my home, and it's all based on lies. I need to know what my rights are. Mr. Harrison leaned back in his large, leather chair. He was silent for a long moment, looking down at the pile of threatening notices on his desk, and then he did something I did not expect. He smiled. It wasn't a small smile. It was a slow, wide, and deeply, wonderfully amused grin that spread across his entire face, making his kind eyes crinkle at the corners. I just stared at him, completely baffled. "What is it?" I asked. "Why are you smiling? This is a nightmare." He let out a low, rumbling chuckle. "Oh, my dear Clara," he said, shaking his head, "this is not a nightmare. This is, I think, about to be one of the most satisfying moments of my long legal career." He leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with a secret, joyful light. "Clara, your grandfather was a very clever man, a very discreet man. He spent his life teaching math, living simply. No one ever knew that he was also one of the shrewdest real estate investors this city has ever seen. He believed in buying and holding tangible assets. He never trusted the stock market." I was completely confused. "What does that have to do with my landlord?" "Everything," he said, his grin widening. He tapped the eviction notice, the one from the Pendleton Group, LLC. "This name," he said, "it is very, very familiar to me." He stood up and walked over to a massive, old-fashioned iron safe that stood in the corner of his office. He began to turn the heavy, brass dial, the clicks echoing in the quiet room. I walked into that lawyer's office expecting to talk about tenant law. I was expecting a long, expensive, uphill battle against a big property management company. I was ready to fight for my rights as a renter. I had no idea that the conversation was about to turn from my rights to my inheritance. I thought I was there to save my apartment. I had no idea I was there to find out that I already owned the entire block. "Your grandfather," Mr. Harrison said, his back to me as he worked the combination on the safe, "set up a trust for you before he passed. He told you it was a small trust. That was a characteristic understatement. He didn't want you to be a trust fund kid. He wanted you to make your own way in the world, to build your own life, which you have done, beautifully." The heavy door of the safe swung open with a satisfying thunk. "But he also believed in protecting his family," he continued. "He knew that bullies and tyrants existed in the world, and he left you an insurance policy, a secret weapon." He reached inside the safe and pulled out a thick, heavy, leather-bound portfolio. He placed it on his desk with a reverent thud. "Clara!" "My dear," he said, his eyes full of a joyful, triumphant light, "I don't think you have a tenant problem. I think your property manager, Mr. Peterson, is about to have an ownership problem of catastrophic proportions." He opened the portfolio. "Before I give you any legal advice about being a tenant," he said, "there is a document in here I think you need to see first. It's the full asset portfolio for the Pendleton Group, LLC, the small family trust your grandfather left you." He turned the portfolio around for me to see, and my world tilted on its axis. It was a list of properties, dozens of them, all over the city, and at the very top of the list, under the heading Primary Holdings, were 4 words that made my heart stop. "The Maple Street Block." I stared at the words on the page. The Maple Street Block. The letters seemed to shimmer, to detach from the paper and float in the air of Mr. Harrison's quiet, sunlit office. My mind simply could not compute the information. It was like reading a sentence in a language I had never seen before. I don't understand, I whispered, my voice a faint, reedy sound. What is this? Is this a joke? Mr. Harrison chuckled. A warm, deep, and profoundly reassuring sound. No. My dear Clara, he said, his eyes twinkling, it is not a joke. Although, knowing your grandfather, he would have certainly appreciated the irony of the situation you find yourself in. This, he said, tapping the thick leather portfolio, is the reality. He leaned back in his chair, a gesture I recognized as him preparing to tell a long story. Clara, what did you know about your grandfather? Really, I mean the man, not just the math teacher. I knew he was kind, I said slowly, my mind still reeling. I knew he was quiet. I knew he loved my grandmother. And he loved solving complex math problems for fun. He was a simple man. He lived a simple life. Yes, Mr. Harrison said with a fond smile. He did live a simple life. That was a conscious choice. But he himself was not a simple man. Your grandfather, the quiet high school math teacher, was also, secretly, one of the most brilliant and successful real estate investors this city has ever produced. I just stared at him, speechless. It started after the war. He began, his voice taking on a narrative cadence. He came home with a little bit of money saved up, and he and your grandmother bought their first home, but they also had enough to buy the small, run-down duplex next door. He fixed it up himself. On nights and weekends, he taught himself plumbing and electrical and carpentry. He used his math teacher's salary to pay the mortgages, and the rent from the duplex went into a separate account. He never touched it. A few years later, he continued. He used the money from that account to buy another building on the same block, a small 4-unit that was in foreclosure, and then another. It became his hobby, his secret passion. It was a real-world math problem for him. He loved finding undervalued properties, calculating the potential returns, managing the logistics. He never bought anything flashy. He only ever bought on your block. Maple Street. He believed in it. He said it had good bones. My mind flashed back to my childhood, to my grandfather in his dusty workshop in the basement, always tinkering, always fixing something. I had thought it was just a hobby. I had no idea he was building an empire. But why did he keep it a secret, I asked, my voice full of a new, dawning wonder. From us, from my father. Because he was a wise man, Mr. Harrison said simply. He had seen what new money could do to a family. He didn't want his son, your father, to be a trust fund kid. He wanted him to have the same drive, the same work ethic that he had. So he created the Pendleton Group. Pendleton was your great-grandmother's maiden name, an anonymous LLC to hold the properties. He lived his life as a humble teacher, and he let his fortune grow quietly, silently, in the background. He always intended for it to be a safety net for his family, he went on. A legacy to be revealed only when it was needed. When he passed, he left a small, respectable inheritance to your father, but the bulk of his estate, the real estate empire, he put into this trust. For you. For me, I whispered. But why not for my father, or shared between us? Mr. Harrison's expression softened. Because he saw you. Clara, he said gently. He saw your mother in you, her artistic soul, but he also saw his own mind in you, your quiet strength, your integrity, your sense of responsibility. He believed that you, of all his family, would understand the true value of what he had built, that you wouldn't see it as just a pile of money, but as a legacy of hard work, and he trusted that you would be a good steward. I was so overwhelmed with a new, different kind of grief, a grief born of a love and respect so profound, that tears began to stream down my face. This quiet, simple man I had adored. He had seen me. He had trusted me. So, I finally said, my voice thick, wiping my tears away. Let me get this straight. The Pendleton Group, LLC, owns my building. My dear, Mr. Harrison said with a grin. The Pendleton Group doesn't just own your building, as the portfolio shows. It owns every single property on both sides of Maple Street, from the corner bakery to the laundromat at the far end. It owns the entire block. He let that sink in, which means he continued, bringing the conversation full circle with a devastating, beautiful finality. That Sterling Property Management, the company that employs your Mr. Peterson, works for the Pendleton Group, which means they work for the trust, which means, my dear Clara, that they work for you. So, picture this. I'm a cellist, living on a modest income, being terrorized by my landlord. I'm worried about being homeless. I go to a lawyer hoping for a miracle, maybe a legal loophole. And the miracle is that the whole time, the building, the block, the company harassing me, it was all mine. I had been paying rent to a property manager who was, technically, my employee, my grandfather, the quiet math teacher, had left me a secret kingdom, and I never knew it existed. The sheer, perfect, poetic irony of it all was so overwhelming. I just started to laugh. A loud, joyful, and slightly unhinged laugh. Mr. Harrison laughed with me. Your grandfather would have loved this, he said when we had both calmed down. He had a wicked sense of humor. The idea of a petty little tyrant like this Mr. Peterson trying to evict his own boss. Oh, he would have savored this. The laughter felt good. It felt like washing away weeks of fear and helplessness. The power dynamic of my entire life had just been fundamentally, seismically altered. I was no longer a powerless tenant. I was the owner. I was the one in charge. My mind, which had been a fog of anxiety, was now sharp and clear. So what do we do now? I asked, my voice now full of a new, steely resolve. Do we just call Mr. Peterson's superior and have him fired? We could, Mr. Harrison said, a mischievous glint in his eye. A simple phone call would end this immediately, but given Mr. Peterson's egregious behavior, his campaign of lies and harassment, I feel a simple termination is insufficient. It's too quiet, too private. He has put you through a great deal of public and private distress. He has threatened your home and your peace of mind. He leaned forward, a conspiratorial smile on his face. Perhaps we should let his little eviction hearing proceed. He has scheduled one, has he not? Yes, I said, a slow, dangerous smile of my own beginning to form as I understood where he was going. Next Tuesday. Excellent, he said. I think we should attend. I think we should let him stand up in front of a judge or a mediator and present his case against you. We should let him list all of your supposed violations. We should let him build his own gallows, right there in the middle of the room. And then I asked, my heart beginning to pound with a new, thrilling anticipation. And then, Mr. Harrison said, his eyes twinkling, I will stand up, and I will introduce his boss to him. The plan was audacious, it was dramatic, and it was perfect. It was a plan my grandfather would have been proud of. I stood up from the chair in Mr. Harrison's office. A new woman, the scared, harassed tenant, was gone. In her place was the quiet, underestimated granddaughter of a secret real estate mogul, a woman who now owned an entire city block, a woman who was about to teach a petty bully a lesson in the fine art of finding out exactly who you're messing with. The hearing was in 5 days, and for the first time in months, I couldn't wait. I walked out of Mr. Harrison's office feeling like a different person. The world looked sharper, the colors more vibrant. The heavy gray cloak of anxiety and helplessness that I had been wearing for weeks had been lifted, replaced by a feeling so unfamiliar and so thrilling I could barely put a name to it. It was power. I went home to my apartment, to the scene of my quiet torment. But it no longer felt like a prison, it felt like my territory. I walked into my living room, took my cello out of its case, and for the first time in a month, I did not reach for the heavy, leaden tort mute. I sat down, settled the beautiful wooden instrument between my knees, and I began to play. I played a Bach cello suite, a piece full of a complex, defiant, and thundering joy. The music filled my small apartment, rich, resonant, and loud. It was the sound of my soul. Uncaged, it was the sound of a woman reclaiming her home. The next 5 days, leading up to the eviction hearing on Tuesday, were a masterclass in the art of the ambush. It was a 2-person play, with me and Mr. Harrison as the directors, and Mr. Peterson as the unwitting, and soon-to-be unemployed, star. My role was to play the part of the beaten, Terrified tenant. It was a role I had, unfortunately, had a lot of practice with lately. On Friday, I saw Mr. Peterson in the hallway as I was leaving for work. He had a smug, predatory smile on his face. He had heard my music the night before. I was sure of it. "Good morning, Miss Vance," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I do hope you're not overexerting yourself. Moving can be so stressful." I looked up at him, my face a perfect mask of worried, downtrodden resignation. "I'm just trying to be prepared." "Mr. Peterson," I said, my voice a meek whisper, "I've been looking at some apartment listings online." "A wise decision," he said with a nod of satisfaction. "It's always best to accept reality. Let me tell you, there are few things more satisfying in this world than watching a bully confidently march into a trap you have meticulously set for them." Every smug email he sent, every condescending look he gave me in the hallway, wasn't an insult anymore. It was a gift. It was another piece of evidence for the case against him. He thought he was building a case for my eviction. He had no idea he was writing the script for his own professional termination. While I was playing the part of the victim at home, I was spending my afternoons in Mr. Harrison's office, planning the war. But we weren't looking at tenant law books. We weren't preparing a defense against his ridiculous, fabricated noise complaints. We were preparing my coronation. Mr. Harrison had the complete corporate and legal history of the Pendleton Group, my grandfather's LLC, laid out on his conference table. We went over the property deeds, the tax records, the articles of incorporation. He showed me the contracts that my grandfather, acting as the anonymous owner of Pendleton, had signed with Sterling Property Management, the company that employed Mr. Peterson. "Your grandfather was a brilliant man," Mr. Harrison said, a look of deep admiration on his face. "He structured this trust so that it would run itself, generating a steady, quiet income, with almost no one knowing who was really behind it. He wanted you to have a legacy, Clara, not a burden." He coached me for the hearing. "You will say nothing," he instructed me, his voice firm. "You will let Mr. Peterson and his lawyer present their entire case. Let him lie. Let him present his evidence of your noise violations. Let him build his own pyre, stick by stick. He will be so focused on his own performance, he will not see the axe coming. Your silence will be your strength. When the time is right, I will handle the rest." Mr. Peterson's arrogance, fueled by my meek submission, grew with every passing day. He was so confident of his victory that, on the Saturday before the hearing, he made his final, fatal mistake. He slipped another envelope under my door. It wasn't a warning this time. It was an offer. "Missy Vance," the letter began, its tone a masterwork of condescending legalese, "in the interest of avoiding a lengthy and costly legal proceeding for all parties, Sterling Property Management, on behalf of the property owners, is prepared to offer you a cash-for-keys settlement. We will offer you the sum of $1,000 in exchange for your immediate vacating of the premises by no later than Monday at 5 p.m., and your signing of an agreement to waive all future claims against the property and its owners." He was offering me $1,000 to leave the apartment building that I, in fact, owned. The sheer, magnificent audacity of it made me laugh out loud. I forwarded the email to Mr. Harrison. He called me back, chuckling. "Oh, he is a gift that just keeps on giving," he said. "He is so blinded by his own petty power trip that he's become a caricature. This is perfect. It shows his clear, premeditated intent to have you removed. Respond to him, be polite, and refuse." So I did. I sent Mr. Peterson a short, meekly worded email. "Dear Mr. Peterson, thank you for your offer. However, I believe I have a right to a formal hearing, and I intend to present my case. Sincerely, Clara Vance." His reply was almost instantaneous. A single, furious sentence. "You will regret this decision, Ms. Vance." A chill went down my spine, but it was a thrill, not a fear. "No, Mr. Peterson," I thought to myself, a cold smile on my face. "You will?" The night before the hearing, my apartment was quiet. I hadn't packed a single box. Instead, I had spent the afternoon at a spa, getting a massage, a manicure, an act of quiet, defiant self-care. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I practiced my cello in the middle of my living room, without a mute, I played the most beautiful, most powerful, most resonant piece I knew. The prelude to Bach's Cello Suite, number 1. A piece that begins with a quiet, searching sadness, but builds into a soaring, triumphant declaration of strength and beauty. The notes filled my apartment, rich and loud and unapologetic. It was the sound of a woman reclaiming her voice. It was a declaration of ownership. After I finished, I sat in the quiet, my cello resting against me. I looked at the leather portfolio Mr. Harrison had given me, which was sitting on my dining room table. Inside were the documents that would change my life, the deed, the trust agreement, my grandfather's will. I thought about him, my quiet, brilliant grandfather. He had seen the world for what it was. He knew it was full of petty tyrants like Mr. Peterson. And he had, with his quiet wisdom, given me more than just a fortune. He had given me a shield, a sword. He had given me the power to fight my own battles. And tomorrow, I would fight this one for both of us. I went to bed that night feeling a profound sense of peace. I was not a scared tenant, worried about being evicted. I was a landlord, about to attend a performance review for a very, very bad employee. And I couldn't wait for the show to begin. The eviction hearing was not held in a courtroom. It was held in a sterile, soulless conference room at the downtown offices of Sterling Property Management. The room was designed to be intimidating. A long, dark, polished table, uncomfortable chairs, and harsh, fluorescent lighting that made everyone look pale and vaguely ill. It was a room designed for quiet, corporate executions, and I was meant to be the one on the chopping block. Mr. Peterson was already there when Mr. Harrison and I arrived. He was sitting on one side of the table with his own lawyer, a slick-looking man from his company's legal department. Mr. Peterson had a thick folder of evidence in front of him. He looked at me as I entered, and his face was a mask of smug, triumphant pity. He looked like a cat who had finally, after a long and satisfying chase, cornered a terrified little mouse. He had no idea that the mouse he was looking at was actually a lioness in disguise. I played my part. I looked down at the floor. I let my shoulders slump. I sat down opposite him and wrung my hands. A picture of a scared, defeated tenant. Mr. Harrison sat beside me, his expression calm, dignified, and completely unreadable. A neutral, third-party mediator, a woman with a tired face, began the proceedings. "Mr. Peterson," she said, "you may present your case." Mr. Peterson's lawyer stood up. "Thank you, Madam Mediator," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "We are here today because the tenant, Ms. Clara Vance, has engaged in a consistent and documented pattern of lease violations that have disturbed the peace and threatened the integrity of the property at 212 Maple Street. We are seeking her immediate eviction." He then handed the floor to Mr. Peterson, who stood up and opened his thick folder of lies. For the next 20 minutes, I was forced to listen to a work of pure fiction. He presented his case with the righteous indignation of a deeply wronged man. He submitted into evidence the warning notices he had slipped under my door, as if they were gospel truth. He presented the blurry photo of the improperly sorted recycling. He presented a log of noise complaints, a log he had clearly fabricated himself with dates and times. On November 12th, he said, his voice full of a grave seriousness, a complaint was logged at 3:15 p.m. for excessive and disruptive musical noise. On November 19th, another complaint at 4:30 p.m. On November 22nd. He went on, his voice a droning litany of my supposed crimes. He painted me as a reckless, inconsiderate, bohemian artist who had no respect for her neighbors or for the rules of civilized living. "We have tried to be reasonable with Mrs. Vance," he concluded, his face a mask of paternal disappointment. "We have issued multiple warnings. We have given her every opportunity to cure these violations, but her behavior has not changed. Her continued tenancy represents a nuisance to the other residents and a liability to the property owners. We are left with no choice but to seek her removal." He sat down, a look of smug satisfaction on his face. He had presented his case. He had won. The mediator turned to us. "Mr. Harrison," she said, "do you have a response?" Mr. Harrison, who had been sitting silently, listening patiently to the entire performance, slowly stood up. Yes, Madam Mediator, he said, his voice calm and respectful. I do. But I will not be responding to the allegations made by Mr. Peterson. I do not believe they are relevant to the matter at hand. Mr. Peterson and his lawyer exchanged a confused look. Instead, Mr. Harrison continued, I would like to ask Mr. Peterson a few clarifying questions for the record. He turned to my landlord. Mr. Peterson, you are the senior property manager for Sterling Property Management. Is that correct? Yes, that's right, Peterson said, puffing out his chest. And Sterling Property Management is the firm that has been contracted to manage the properties owned by a holding company, an LLC. Is that also correct? Yes, Peterson said, a little impatiently. And what is the name of that LLC? Mr. Peterson. The owners of the building at 212 Maple Street. It's the Pendleton Group, LLC, he said, clearly annoyed by this line of questioning. The Pendleton Group? Mr. Harrison repeated slowly, letting the name hang in the air. Thank you. And just so we are all perfectly clear, your primary professional and fiduciary duty, as an employee of Sterling Property Management, is to act in the best interests of your employer, the owners of the property, the Pendleton Group, LLC. Is that correct? Yes, of course, Peterson said with a dismissive wave. That is my duty, to protect the owner's investment from problem tenants like... He gestured towards me. Mr. Harrison held up a hand, stopping him. Thank you, Mr. Peterson. That is all I needed to clarify. He then turned to the mediator. Madam Mediator, I have no intention of disputing Mr. Peterson's claims about my client's cello playing. Instead, I would like to address the fundamental misunderstanding under which this entire proceeding is operating. He reached into his own leather briefcase and pulled out a thick, official-looking document. Mr. Peterson seems to believe that he is here today on behalf of the owners of the property. And in a way, he is. However, he seems to be confused about who. Exactly. That is, he looked directly at Peterson, and a slow, beautiful, and utterly devastating smile spread across his face. My primary client in this matter, he announced, his voice ringing with a quiet, dramatic power, is not the tenant. My primary client is the owner of the property. I am the lead counsel for the Pendleton Group, LLC. The color drained from Mr. Peterson's face. His lawyer's jaw went slack. The mediator just stared, her pen frozen above her notepad. And the Pendleton Group, Mr. Harrison continued, enjoying the moment, felt it was very important that the owner be present today to witness this proceeding firsthand, to get a clear sense of how her property is being managed, and to hear your assessment of her own character as a tenant. He then turned and gestured, with a grand, theatrical flourish. To me, Mr. Peterson, he said, his voice now a booming proclamation of victory. I would like to formally introduce you to your employer. This is Miss Clara Vance, the founder, the sole member, and the chairman of the Pendleton Group, LLC. Have you ever seen a bully, a real petty tyrant who thrives on his little sliver of power, have that power so completely and so suddenly annihilated that his brain actually short-circuits? It is a glorious, beautiful, and deeply satisfying sight. Mr. Peterson's face went through the 5 stages of grief in about 30 seconds. First, there was denial. He just shook his head, a small sputtering laugh escaping his lips. No, that's not possible. That's ridiculous. Then came anger. He pointed a trembling finger at me. This is a trick. She's a musician. She lives in a 1-bedroom apartment. She is not the owner of anything. Then came bargaining. He looked at the mediator, his eyes pleading. This is a procedural violation. You can't allow this. Then, depression. He seemed to shrink in his chair, the full catastrophic weight of what was happening finally crashing down on him. He replayed the last 2 months in his head, every threatening note, every condescending phone call, every petty fine, every act of harassment he had directed at me. He had actually been directing at his own, new, very powerful boss. And finally, acceptance, or rather, abject, groveling terror. Ms. Vance, he stammered, his face the color of wet concrete. He stood up, knocking over his glass of water. Ms. Vance, I had no idea. This is a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. I was just doing my job. It was at that moment that I finally spoke. I had been silent this entire time, just watching, letting the beautiful karmic chaos unfold. I stood up, my own composure a stark contrast to his unraveling. I looked him dead in the eye, my expression not angry, not triumphant, just cold. No. Mr. Peterson, I said, my voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of absolute authority. You are not doing your job. Your job is to manage my property and to treat my tenants with respect. You have failed on both counts. You have harassed a tenant without cause. You have fabricated evidence. And you have wasted my time and my money on this ridiculous, fraudulent eviction hearing. I picked up my briefcase. This hearing is concluded, I announced to the stunned mediator. I then turned back to my now former property manager. Mr. Peterson, I said, a final, dismissive thought occurring to me. You're fired. And then, Mr. Harrison and I turned, and we walked out of the conference room, leaving him standing in the ruins of his own petty tyranny. Mr. Harrison and I walked out of the sterile conference room and into the quiet, elegant hallway of his law firm, leaving the wreckage of Mr. Peterson's career behind us. I felt dizzy, my mind still reeling from the whiplash of the last hour. I had walked into that room a terrified tenant, and I had walked out a landlord, a queen who had just, with a few quiet words from her counsel, checkmated a very stupid, very arrogant pawn. Mr. Harrison was chuckling, a deep rumbling sound of pure satisfaction. I must confess, Clara, he said, his eyes twinkling, I have not enjoyed a legal proceeding that much in over 20 years. The look on his face when I introduced you, it was priceless, absolutely priceless. Your grandfather would have been delighted. We went back to his office, and he poured us both a small glass of very old, very good scotch. So, he said, raising his glass, to the new chairman of the Pendleton Group, what is your first order of business? I took a sip of the smoky, peaty scotch. The fire of it in my chest was a grounding, clarifying thing. My mind, which had been a chaotic storm, was suddenly very, very clear. Our first order of business, Mr. Harrison, I said, a new authority in my voice that surprised even me, is to fire Sterling Property Management immediately for gross misconduct and harassment of a property owner. Mr. Harrison's smile widened. An excellent decision, he said. I will draft the letter of termination myself, with pleasure. And that was my first act as the new, secret queen of Maple Street. The aftermath was both swift and deeply satisfying. Mr. Davies sent a scathing, legally binding letter to the CEO of Sterling Property Management, formally terminating their contract and detailing, in excruciating detail, the fraudulent and abusive behavior of their employee, Mr. Peterson. I have no idea what became of Mr. Peterson. I imagine his career in property management is over. I have never heard his name again. And for that, I am grateful. My next act was to write a letter of my own. It was addressed to the 5 other tenants in my building, my neighbors, my friends. I introduced myself as the new, anonymous owner behind the Pendleton Group. I assured them that my sole intention was to preserve the character and community of our building. I promised them that there would be no exorbitant rent hikes, no gut renovations. I told them that our home was safe. The response was an outpouring of relief and joy. There was a small, impromptu celebration in the hallway that evening. We were all a family again, safe from the threat of corporate raiders. They had no idea that the anonymous, benevolent owner they were toasting was the cellist from apartment 4B. And for now, I decided to keep it that way. The next year of my life was a journey of discovery. I, Clara Vance, the quiet musician, became a businesswoman. I worked closely with Mr. Harrison, who, at my insistence, stayed on as the lead counsel for the trust. He became my mentor, my guide into the complex world of real estate, finance, and property management that my grandfather had so masterfully navigated. I learned to read a balance sheet. I learned about zoning laws and property taxes. I learned how to negotiate with contractors. I discovered a part of my own mind that I never knew existed: a sharp, analytical, and surprisingly shrewd business acumen. It turned out that the daughter of a math teacher had a good head for numbers. After all, I took over the active management of the Pendleton Group. It was a massive undertaking. My grandfather's quiet hobby had grown into a significant portfolio of residential and commercial properties, all of them in historic, character-filled neighborhoods like my own. He had spent a lifetime building this empire, and I felt a profound sense of duty to be a good steward of his legacy. I hired a new, smaller, more respectful property management company to handle the day-to-day operations. But I was the one who set the policies. I was the one who made the final decisions. And I ran the company with the same values my grandfather had: integrity, fairness, and a deep belief in the importance of community. And in my own building, on Maple Street, I became the kind of landlord I had always wished I'd had. I used the funds from the trust to finally give the old building the love it deserved. We put on a new roof. We had the beautiful, original hardwood floors in the hallways refinished. We installed new, energy-efficient windows in every apartment, and in the neglected, weed-choked patch of dirt behind the building, I started a community garden. I designed it myself, with raised beds for vegetables and a beautiful, winding path lined with my mother's favorite peonies and my grandfather's beloved sunflowers. Every tenant was given a plot, and on weekends, our small, 6-unit family would be out there together, our hands in the dirt, growing our own food, our own community. The building was more than just a property. It was a thriving, vibrant home. And my music was finally set free. The fear was gone, the anxiety, the constant, low-grade terror of making too much noise was gone. I would come home to my apartment, my beautiful, safe sanctuary, and I would play. I played my cello every single day, without a mute. I played with the windows open, and the rich, beautiful, resonant sound of my box suites would drift out into the quiet evening air. My neighbors would sometimes sit out on their fire escapes to listen. The music that poured out of me was different now. It was no longer the sound of a quiet, lonely struggle. It was the sound of a joy so profound, so hard-won, that it was a physical presence. It was the sound of freedom. It was the sound of a woman who was finally, completely, and unapologetically at home in her own life. I often think about my grandfather, the quiet, humble math teacher who was secretly a king. He had given me a gift so much greater than money. He had seen a strength in me that I had not seen in myself. He had left me a puzzle, a challenge, a secret kingdom to discover. His final act was not one of charity, it was one of empowerment. He didn't just give me a safety net, he gave me a throne. And I think about the beautiful, perfect irony of it all. Mr. Peterson, in his petty, cruel quest to silence me, to evict me, to take away my home, had been the unwitting catalyst for my own coronation. His harassment was the very thing that led me to call Mr. Harrison, the very thing that led me to uncover the truth of my own power. He had tried to kick me out of my apartment, and in doing so, he had handed me the keys to the entire block. It was a lesson in karma so exquisite. It was almost musical. So, I leave you with this. To anyone out there who has ever felt powerless, who has ever been bullied by someone with a little bit of authority, remember this story. Your worth is not determined by your job, or your apartment, or the noise you make in the world. It is an intrinsic, unshakable thing. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to stand up to a bully, big or small, I want to hear about it in the comments. Your story of strength deserves to be heard. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in the power of a quiet woman and a loud cello. And remember, you are the owner of your own life. You set the rules. You decide who gets to live there. Don't ever let anyone try to evict you from it.